from the CyberHub bunker and studio, you're tuning in to the CyberHub podcast. And now for your host and CISO, James Azar.
Well, folks, happy Thursday. Welcome to today's show. If you can't tell, right next to me on this awesome screen, next to the legend, is the one, the only, Tony Cole. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. We've got a lot of people eager to hear from you, Tony. So before I do that, while we get everyone on here and we bring some comments up and say hi to everyone, welcome to the Practitioner Brief. If this is your first time tuning in, the show's about risk, impact, and mitigation of some of the latest and greatest vulnerabilities that exist as practitioners. Tony Cole, CTO over at Attivo Networks. So please make sure to subscribe. Attivo is one of our big supporters of our show, and without them, none of this content would be possible. I'm grateful that Tony has taken time out of his very, very busy morning to be with us here today. We're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, so please make sure to subscribe and follow us there. You can also check out our YouTube channel at CyberHub Podcast, where we've got a ton of great content. And also on your favorite podcast listening platform, Apple, Spotify, Google, and all the great ones as well. So we've got a lot of people tuning in this morning. We'll start doing a quick shout out. This is, this is my good Air Force buddy who's just about to step away. He's starting his transition. John De La Cruz, happy Thursday, buddy. Greetings from Brian. Greetings from Beyond the Grid. Brian lives off the grid, Tony, literally off the grid.
Oh, very cool.
Off the grid. The awesome JJ Davey, one of my favorite bearded human beings. Howdy from Ola. How's it going, buddy? James McQuiggan with a good morning to all and hello to you specifically.
Morning, James. Good morning, everyone.
Harshil Shah, good morning. Happy Thursday. Matt, RIP John McAfee. And good morning from Greg. Yeah, we'll kick off this morning, but before we do that, my ceremonial espresso. I don't know if do you have any coffee, Tony? I forgot to ask you.
I just finished a cup and did not go back downstairs. As you know, I'm broadcasting from a hotel room right now. It's great to see hotels back in business. Okay. Right? I'm grateful to see things back to some level of normal. But we're not here to talk about COVID today, folks. We're here to talk about cybersecurity, vulnerabilities, risk, impact, and mitigation. We'll kick off with a story that really hits home for a lot of people in our industry, because I think if you talk to anyone who's been in this industry for more than 10, 15 years, they've all at one point or another worked for a company. This guy found it. John McAfee, who tragically passed away yesterday in jail in Barcelona. Tony, have you ever met John or had the opportunity to? I know you worked at McAfee. Yeah, I did work at McAfee for a number of years. Never met John. He hadn't been associated with the company since 1994. Although we almost everybody in our industry that's been around for a while followed the different stories that followed John. So he had an interesting life. As we stated earlier, I think he was a bit of a tortured soul, but certainly a brilliant guy. And may he rest in peace. I think Matt's comment down there fits very well. Rest in peace, John McAfee, you absolute nut.
I think a lot of us, sometimes we have pioneers, right? And an industry reaches a specific point in its life where its pioneers are what make it so mainstream. And what made security and antivirus so mainstream was John McAfee. That was the name associated with antivirus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I completely agree with you. He was a pioneer for sure. There's a really interesting book, if you haven't looked at it yet, from Richard Steenan. So, and it's the cybersecurity, almanac, and it goes through all the history of cybersecurity, all the different companies, who bought them, which ones didn't make it. It's really, really interesting if you're interested in the history of our industry from the technology vendor side.
What's the name of that book? Who wrote it?
I think it's the Cybersecurity Almanac. I'll pull up the link and send it, drop it in the chat.
Yeah, I think people would absolutely love it. Great. So our condolences to John McAfee's amazing wife, who was with him for the last about 15 years. I've had the pleasure of meeting her, and I can't imagine what she's going through right now. So just a lot of somber remembrance of this person. And so, yeah, JJ says the book sounds like a great read. I think you can't work in an industry if you don't know its history. So at least know its history, folks. We're going to get into our next story for this morning, folks. A VMware who have been featured on my show now 2 days in a row with another critical vulnerability, this time in the Carbon Black app control. So there's a patch available for an authentication bypass vulnerability in VMware Carbon Black app control app C running on Windows machines. The app C is designed to improve the security of servers and other critical systems by locking them down to prevent unauthorized tampering. I'm going to kick this to you, Tony, because one of the aspects of this specifically here, which I think a lot of security practitioners need to start paying attention to, is just because the company has security in its title doesn't always necessarily mean it's 100% secure. And I think we have this fake illusion that cybersecurity companies are impenetrable by our adversaries.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it's really, really unfortunate. You know, when you look at the trust that we place in software in our environment, and that trust that that company has placed in another company, in multiple companies, it can be very, very, very problematic. You know, and you and I had talked about this before. There's a researcher out at UC Berkeley, and I'm trying to remember his name. Last name was Weaver, but he stated, you know, not only are you trusting your vendor, but you're trusting your vendor's vendors. So, and it's a really important point, I think, that's lost in a lot of people. And it's something that I think SolarWinds has shown us all. We must focus on this issue.
Yeah, SolarWinds was one aspect. I mean, Pulse Secure, who's, you know, a VPN provider, has had a serious vulnerability, I think, every year for the last 4 years running. And so, you know, security is hard. That's one thing I always like to tell people is security isn't easy. It's not, you know, it's not making a mug.
Yeah.
Making a mug's easy. There's already blueprints of how to make a mug. You're not reinventing it. You make a mug. You go to a factory, they make it for you. Security, on the other hand, has no single point of contact. Like, it's got one single point of failure, and that's it. It's done. Right? And once and that's a very low margin of that's a very high margin of error. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just simply going to say you make a really important point on the mug that a lot of people, you know, outside of our industry don't think about. And it's the fact that everybody is trying to connect everything to everything. I mean, you're drinking out of what's clearly a glass mug, but nevertheless, you can buy connected mugs now, so that to keep your coffee warm, you know, with heaters in them. You know, you can get warmers in your car, which is connected to the internet. You know, it's astounding to me how there are so many things that everybody is connecting to the internet that, quite frankly, don't need to be connected. So my wife wanted our house more automated that we just moved into, and I'm like, nope, there's no need for it. You know, get up and flip the light switch over there. Don't need to put a bunch of, you know, Echoes, Amazon switches on there. No need to, you know, to wire so many different things. Like my alarm system on my house, it's not connected to anything except the police station and the panel. I don't want it connected to Wi-Fi. I don't want it connected to the internet.
Yeah, that's how it should be. But nonetheless, that's a problem. So this CVE, folks, is 2021 2190908 and has a CVSS score of 9.4. If you are a user of VM Carbon Black app control, please make sure you get it patched today. Should have been patched yesterday, but get it done today, folks.
9.4 is high. That's you know, that's pretty close to 10. So
you know, to me, when a vendor comes out and says anything over a 9, that means it's a 10 for me, right? Because depending on how you deploy a product, but nonetheless, it becomes a 10. So Tony and I have been debating how we say this name. And I know a lot of you guys know this company, but it's Atlassian, right? Atlassian. Wonderful. The creators of Jira, which I think all of us use, could have a bug, the Atlassian bugs could lead to a one-click account takeover. So the platform that's used by 180,000 customers to engineer software and manage projects could have been hijacked with a single click due to a security flaw, according to researchers. CPR researchers said that with just one click, an attacker could have siphoned sensitive information out of Jira, such as security issues, Bitbucket, and on-premise products. The flaws could have also enabled an attacker to take over accounts, control some of the applications, including Jira and Confluence, a web-based corporate wiki that comes with a built-in Tomcat web server and an HSQL database, and which also supports other databases. More than 60,000 customers use Confluence, including LinkedIn, NASA, and the Retraction Times. With the level of control, one imagines that an exploit could have been fashioned that would have been similar to a SolarWinds supply chain attack, in which attackers could have used the default password as an open door into the software updating mechanism. And here we go. We SAS'd our entire environments, and now we're watching this happen right before our very own eyes.
You know, James, that is a really scary one to me. When you think about how many vendors and companies in general use those capabilities from Atlassian and their partners, this could potentially be even worse than SolarWinds if it was compromised. And we always talk about, wow, look at this and look what could have happened. But I always like to emphasize what probably is happening somewhere that we're simply not aware of, with different supply chain, attack taking place, and simply put, no one's uncovered it yet. Obviously, we don't know that, but we also don't know if it isn't happening. I know that's a double negative, but nevertheless, I think it's an important point to think about. We are now seeing what looks like more research teams focused on supply chain, and I think that's critically important and something we should all consider and think about. Who are the vendors inside our environment, and what level of trust do you have with them, and is that real trust or is it misplaced trust?
So to me, the biggest red flag here is Bitbucket. So Jira manages my projects, and yes, it has a ton of very sensitive information, but getting access to Bitbucket, that's getting access to repositories, that's getting access to GitHub, Bitbucket, GitLab, and being able to manipulate projects there, maybe without anyone picking up on them. That to me is what a day in a life of going sleepless, worrying about our DevOps would seem like. If you had a worst case scenario, right? If you hired like the most outrageous consultant on the world and said, hey, we want to do a tabletop exercise on the worst possible day, and someone drew up this scenario that we saw right here, you'd be like, yeah, but this will probably never happen. And here it is.
Yeah, and that's the issue. How many other widespread implementations of a specific type of software could potentially be, breached by a well-resourced nation state, and we simply haven't detected it because no one's been looking. So I'm hopeful that researchers continue to focus on some of these larger providers of software that's hidden behind other people's software that they're developing, so we can find it and fix the issues before a nation state takes advantage of it. Hey, James, before we move on, I just wanted to say I've neglected to sign in to the system, so I can't post in the comments. I just wanted to tell everybody it's simply security-yearbook.com for that book. Security-yearbook.com if somebody's interested in looking at that history of cybersecurity.
I will add it to the notes of the show, folks, so you guys can see it there after the fact. David says, well said, the unknown is most likely happening. Assume breach is a sad but true statement for many practitioners.
Yeah, it's important they all understand it, because if the CISO and the C-level and the board doesn't understand that, we potentially see another CISO and part of the security team getting fired for something they likely could not have stopped.
Yeah. We'll move on to our next story before we get to what I'm so excited to be talking about, which is the Defend framework. We talked about it yesterday, but today I get the master, Tony, on here to talk about it. This is quickly, I'll just go over this, a Linux marketplace that's based on a plain platform that are impacted by cross-site scripting vulnerability and potentially exposed to a supply chain attack. The vulnerability, which has been kind of noted according to the researchers on this one, which is Fabian Brulon Brownline discovered that all Pling-based marketplaces are impacted by the cross-site scripting that potentially opens the door for a supply chain attack. The issue was discovered in the KDE Discover Marketplace, also impacts Pling-based FOSS apps that store such as like App Image Hub and many others. There's not yet been the vulnerability hasn't yet been addressed. He did contact Pling, they didn't respond. And so he did manage to contact the people who were building these apps, and they were able to quickly address those issues. So keep that in mind if you're using this. I want to get to the Defend framework. So Tony, the Defend framework, trending everywhere, a huge thing. I think this is, I told you this before the show, but this is the first time we get a framework funded by the NSA with MITRE, talking about defense, not from a defensive posture, but from an offensive mindset.
First, I really appreciate how you just phrased that, because it's really important for people to think about, the challenges that NSA lives in. They're part of the intelligence apparatus for the United States. And it is phenomenal to see that they truly have leadership now that understands the threat to industry and are releasing tools in conjunction, with their FFRDC, Federally Funded Research and Development Corporation, MITRE, to provide to industry to make us a little more secure. No perfect solution, absolutely, and I'm sure all your viewers know that, but Defend is a great step forward, for people to really understand the defensive side, how to counter, what you're pulling out of MITRE ATT&CK, and your own experiences inside your enterprise, and tying that against Defend to look at, am I doing everything that I need to do around my high value assets, my critical resources? So, and here's a really good, graph to show me, if this is my critical assets, here are the things I should have been doing. Oh, great, I'm doing pretty good, but oh no, I've missed two. Let me go in and look at that. And of course, I was thrilled to see the deception piece, Deceive, in here. It's grown in popularity so much and had been overlooked, I think, by some government. So it's really nice to see NSA come out with MITRE and say it's an important piece, of protecting your environment.
Yeah, you pointed out that Deceive has now its kind of like own little spot on here, but in the detect portion, there's also a lot of deception.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Endpoint and on the network side. So there's a lot of pieces in here. About the only thing that I wish they'd focus on a little bit more, and I'll get on my soapbox for 10 seconds, and that's Active Directory. People just, for some reason on the security side, don't talk about the fact that 90% of attacks utilize Active Directory. So, including SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline and JBS, and yet most security teams like, oh, I don't own Active Directory. If you're security for the company, you should definitely, have a partnership there where you can work on the problems in Active Directory. The GPS and plumbing, for most enterprises out there, and it's high time that security teams focus on it if they're not already. And if you are focused on it already, kudos to you.
Yeah, so great point. I've had Carolyn on. We talked about Active Directory. And on July 17th, folks, that's Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern, Carolyn and Joseph from Attivo will be joining me to talk about Active Directory in an awesome webinar that will also be streaming, but you can sign up now because we won't be bringing up streaming questions, but if you want to be part of the discussion, go register right now. The link's in the show notes to be part of that webinar on July 17th with Carolyn and Joe. It's going to be a really fun time because I see the Active Directory writing in bold, underlined in a huge font, but most people are still actively kind of passing it off to the side, dismissing it almost.
I was doing a roundtable earlier this month, and I did meet two CISOs that owned Active Directory in its entirety, which was just stunning to me and a great sign. I don't think that's going to become a trend, but the fact that they're engaged, in cleaning up Active Directory, I think is a fantastic point. Cyber hygiene is critical. Active Directory should be a component of your cyber hygiene, in my opinion. James, the other piece I just wanted to mention related to Defend, it was really interesting for NSA to release their The Next Wave publication. And if you've not read those, it's really good. It's typically research and technologies that they think are up and coming and impactful. And this quarter's Next Wave from NSA was all around deception that they released in conjunction with Defend, which I thought was pretty cool.
And that's the Next Wave, correct? That's the
Next Wave.
Yeah. I will have that link also in the show notes, folks. So if you go to our YouTube channel, or if you look at this LinkedIn video in about 20 minutes after we're done today, you'll see both of those links right there. So you guys can actually see the book, the securityyearbook.com, and the Next Wave. Yeah, I'm glad to see deception on there. The one thing I will say about Defend that I think a lot of people need to kind of wrap their heads around it is when, you know, you've been part of NIST and you've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people. When they're building these frameworks, they're predominantly coming from a traditional defensive perspective, almost like, how do we defend our shoreline, or how do we defend our base? And you create all these different obstacles in the way. When you look at Defend and when you talk about it with executives, I think within your business, and you're talking to your CFO about maybe possibly getting more funding to talk to implement some of the stuff in here, or get more HR. The best way to talk about this is the first time the government's given us insight into how our offensive cyber operations take place, and what are some of the things that could possibly stop those offensive cyber operations in track. And coming from the NSA, which I think is the most prolific cybersecurity power in the world, I am sure happy they're funding this and contributing some parts to it, because without it, would always be playing catch up. This is an opportunity to put us ahead.
I agree with you completely. And, you know, when you look at what happened with SolarWinds, you know, and that could have happened to any software company. And we just talked about a few stories where it could have happened, and it may be happening elsewhere as well. And I think it's really important to get the tool set out and get people's minds wrapped around the challenges that we have and what you should be doing from a defensive structure in direct relation to the capabilities of nation states and, you know, criminal groups. I think that's super important. And did you see the comment from David there? I thought that was interesting. He said in some instances, thanks for popping it up. So I think that's a really great point you bring up, David. You know, we see that a lot as well, where, you know, the CIO owns Active Directory, the CISO doesn't report to the CIO, and they, you know, are unable to touch that. It's plumbing, and people are concerned about breaking something. But in reality, it is upon the leadership. That's what they need to do, is bring those camps together. I agree 100% with your comment.
Yeah, I want to read it to everyone listening on our podcast platform. So David said, in some instances, there is that separation struggle between the ops engineers and security, really up to leadership to bring both camps together. And yeah, well said, David. Folks, that's it for our practitioner brief this Thursday. We're all wrapped up. Later today on the CISO Talk podcast, the leaders of Cardinal Health, Lori, Brittany, Jana, Samara, all joined me on a awesome, magnificent show where we spent time talking about how they are really hardening and reaching out in these times to continually expand their cybersecurity program at Cardinal Health. That'll be live at 11 a.m. on YouTube and on the CISO Talk audio podcast. Just you can find that on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, and so many other places. So you should go check that out. You don't want to miss this episode. It really was a blast to record, and it's really great content. So Tony Cole, thank you so much for joining us today. Paul agrees that we had a great talk.
Thank you, Paul. And James, thanks for having me on the show. It's always great fun talking with current problems.
Yes.
And, in this case, and solution.
Yeah. Well, you know, everything we talk about has to have some sort of a workaround, you know. Patch your vulnerabilities, kind of important. I know a lot of people try to look at patches, and patching is more complex than just updating, you know, Office 365 on your computer, but nonetheless, it's still as critical and just as important to get those patches worked in. So folks, that's it for us here today. We'll be back on Monday 9 a.m. right here live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube with another practitioner brief. Tomorrow, Tech Corner, also with Joseph Salazar from Attivo Networks. We're going to be talking about the new endpoints and how endpoints have evolved. That'll be live. Also at 11 a.m. tomorrow, I'll be live on LinkedIn with my buddy Hans. We're going to be talking, and his lovely wife, and we're going to be doing a live about how do we, Hans Vargas folks will be joining me tomorrow with his wife, and we'll be talking a little bit about how do we expand security into middle schools, and something that him and his wife are doing in as practitioners. They're going to schools and talking to kids. So that'll be right here live tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern on my LinkedIn page, YouTube, and Facebook. And yeah, that's it for us here, folks. Tony, again, thank you so much, and everyone tuning in. Thank you for all your comments. Thank you for everyone taking the morning to spend some time with us, and we'll be back with more later. Until then, stay cyber safe. Cheers.
Cheers.
We love feedback, so make sure to connect with us on social media and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform.